Imagine for a moment that everything you think you know about Linux is frozen in time somewhere around 10 or 15 years ago. You picture black terminal windows, cryptic commands, broken Wi-Fi, and a system only hackers and programmers could love. You picture something fragile, complicated, and not meant for normal people. Now imagine waking up today, installing a modern Linux distribution, and realizing that almost everything you believed is outdated. Not slightly outdated, completely wrong. That moment of realization is what many longtime Windows users experience when they finally try modern Linux. And honestly, most Windows users aren't ready for what Linux can do now. If you've been using Windows for years, maybe decades, you've grown accustomed to a certain rhythm. You boot up, you log in, you wait. You install updates, you wait some more. You deal with pop-ups, notifications, restarts, antivirus scans, and background processes you never asked for. You accept it because it's normal. It's what everyone uses, but normal doesn't always mean good. And once you step into the modern Linux ecosystem, that normal starts to feel strange. The first shock for many Windows users is how polished Linux desktops have become. When you install something like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora Workstation, or Pop_OS, you're not greeted by a bare-bones hacker environment. You're greeted by a clean, modern, visually pleasing desktop that looks intentional. Animations are smooth. Fonts are crisp, icons are consistent. Windows snap into place. Workspaces glide in and out. Everything feels cohesive. Take Linux Mint, for example. Linux Mint is designed specifically for people coming from Windows. The menu is familiar. The taskbar is familiar. The layout makes sense immediately. You can sit a lifelong Windows user in front of Linux Mint, and they'll know how to open apps, browse files, and change settings within minutes. Ubuntu, on the other hand, offers a more modern, streamlined interface that feels closer to Mac OS while still being its own thing. Fedora Workstation pushes a clean, forward-thinking GNOME experience. Pop_OS adds productivity features like tiling windows and intelligent workspace management right out of the box. These are not experimental toys. These are professional, stable operating systems used by millions of people every day. Another surprise is speed. Not a little bit faster, noticeably faster. On the same hardware, Linux often feels lighter and more responsive than Windows. Boot times are shorter. Shutdown times are shorter. Applications launch faster. Even older computers that struggle with Windows 10 or Windows 11 suddenly feel alive again when running Linux Mint, Ubuntu, or Xubuntu. That dusty laptop you were thinking about throwing away? Linux can turn it into a perfectly usable machine. This isn't magic. Linux simply doesn't waste resources the way Windows does. There's no massive telemetry system constantly phoning home. There's no forced antivirus running full scans in the background. There aren't dozens of hidden processes doing who knows what. Linux gives you control. You decide what runs. You decide what starts with the system. You decide what gets installed. And speaking of installing software, this is another area where Windows users are often stunned. On Windows, installing software usually means opening a browser, searching for a program, clicking random websites, dodging fake download buttons, and hoping you didn't accidentally install a toolbar or adware. On Linux, most software comes from trusted repositories maintained by the distribution. You open a software center, type what you want, click install, and you're done. Want a web browser? Firefox, Chromium, Brave, Vivaldi, and more are right there. Want an office suite? LibreOffice is one click away. Want a video editor? CanLive, Shotcut, DaVinci Resolve, and OpenShot are available. Want a photo editor? GIMP Krita, Darktable. Want music production? Ardour, LMS, Bitwig Studio. Want programming tools? Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, IntelliJ IDEA, Eclipse. It's all centralized, curated, and safe. Distributions like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora Workstation, and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed make this experience especially smooth. They provide graphical app stores that feel just as easy as downloading apps on a phone. No hunting for installers, no license pop-ups, no surprise bundled software. Then there's updates. On Windows, updates are infamous. They arrive at inconvenient times. They sometimes break things. They force restarts. They feel out of your control. On Linux, updates are usually fast, quiet, and optional. You choose when to apply them. You can update the entire system, including the operating system and all installed applications. With a single click or a single command, no endless reboot loops. No hour-long configuring updates screens. Distributions like Linux Mint and Ubuntu even provide update managers that categorize updates by importance, so you can see what's critical and what's optional. Fedora Workstation and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed push very up-to-date software, giving you access to the latest kernels, drivers, and features without the chaos Windows updates often bring. Another big revelation for Windows users is customization. Windows offers some customization, but it's mostly superficial. Change the wallpaper. Change the accent color. Maybe move the taskbar. On Linux, customization goes much deeper. You can change the entire desktop environment. You can choose between GNOME, KDE Plasma, Cinnamon, XFCE, Mate, and more. Each desktop environment has its own look, feel, and workflow. KDE Plasma, for example, is insanely customizable. You can move panels, add widgets, change animations, tweak transparency, adjust window behavior, and make the desktop look however you want. You can make Linux look like Windows. You can make Linux look like Mac OS. You can make Linux look like something completely unique. Cinnamon, used by Linux Mint, offers a classic desktop feel with modern polish. GNOME, used by Ubuntu and Fedora Workstation, focuses on simplicity and workflow efficiency. For Windows users, this level of control is both exciting and shocking. You're no longer locked into one company's idea of how a desktop should work. You shape your system around how you actually use your computer. Security is another area where Linux quietly outclasses Windows in ways most people don't realize. Linux's permission system makes it much harder for malware to install itself. Software typically comes from trusted repositories instead of random websites. Viruses targeting Linux desktops are extremely rare compared to Windows malware. This doesn't mean Linux is magically immune, but it does mean the attack surface is much smaller. Most Linux users don't even run traditional antivirus software, and their systems remain secure. That alone feels alien to Windows users who have grown up in a world where antivirus is mandatory. The idea that your operating system is designed from the ground up with security in mind, rather than patched on later, is a big shift. Then there's privacy. Windows 10 and Windows 11 collect a significant amount of telemetry data. Even if you disable many options, some data collection remains. On Linux, especially with distributions like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora Workstation, Debian, and OpenSUSE, you have far more transparency. You can inspect what's running. You can see what services are active. You can choose not to send data. Many distributions send little to no telemetry by default. For users who care about digital privacy, this is huge. You're no longer feeling like the product. You're the user, not the data source. Gaming is another area where outdated perceptions die hard. For a long time, Linux gaming was rough. Today, thanks largely to Valve's work on Steam and Proton, Linux gaming is better than most people realize. Thousands of Windows games now run on Linux with little or no effort. You install Steam on Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Pop!_OS, or Fedora Workstation, enable Proton, and suddenly your library just works. Many popular games like Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, The Witcher 3, Baldur's Gate 3, and countless indie titles run beautifully on Linux. Performance is often comparable to Windows, and sometimes even better. NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel all provide solid Linux drivers. Pop!_OS in particular is known for its excellent NVIDIA support out of the box. This doesn't mean every single Windows game works on Linux, but the gap is shrinking rapidly. For a huge percentage of gamers, Linux is already a viable daily driver. Another thing Windows users aren't ready for is how stable Linux can be. Windows updates sometimes introduce bugs that crash systems, break drivers, or cause blue screens. On Linux, especially on stable distributions like Ubuntu LTS, Linux Mint, Debian Stable, and OpenSUSE Leap, the focus is reliability. These systems are designed to run for long periods without crashing. It's not unusual for Linux servers to run for months or years without rebooting. That same stability exists on the desktop. You can leave your system running for weeks without issues. Crashes are rare. Slowdowns are rare. The system doesn't gradually rot over time, the way Windows sometimes feels like it does. Software freedom is another philosophical shift. On Windows, most software is proprietary. You don't know how it works. You can't inspect it. You can't modify it. On Linux, a huge amount of software is open source. That means anyone can inspect the code, anyone can contribute, anyone can fix bugs, anyone can create improvements. This leads to an ecosystem where innovation happens everywhere. Small teams and individual developers can create incredible tools that rival or exceed commercial software. It also means you're not locked into one company's ecosystem. If a project dies, someone else can fork it and continue development. Windows users are also often surprised by how easy it is to recover a broken Linux system. On Windows, if something goes wrong, you might need to reinstall the entire OS. On Linux, problems are usually more localized. A broken desktop environment doesn't mean a broken system. You can switch to another desktop environment. A corrupted configuration file can be deleted and regenerated. You have options. Live USBs allow you to boot into a full Linux environment without touching your installed system. You can rescue files, repair bootloaders, and fix issues without reinstalling. This level of control feels empowering once you experience it. Another quiet advantage is how Linux handles storage. Linux file systems like X4BTRFs and XFS are extremely robust. BTRFs, used by some distributions like OpenSUSE, Tumbleweed, and Fedora Workstation, supports snapshots. This means the system can automatically create restore points. If an update goes wrong, you can roll back to a previous snapshot in minutes. Imagine Windows System Restore, but actually reliable and deeply integrated into the system. Windows users often don't realize how much background clutter accumulates over time. Old registry entries, leftover files, half uninstalled programs. Linux doesn't have a central registry like Windows. Configuration is usually stored in plain text files. Removing software actually removes it. The system stays clean. There's also the sheer variety of Linux distributions, which can be overwhelming at first, but is actually a strength. Ubuntu focuses on ease of use and broad hardware support. Linux Mint focuses on comfort and familiarity. Fedora Workstation focuses on cutting-edge technology and open-source purity. Pop_OS focuses on productivity and creators. Arch Linux focuses on minimalism and user control. EndeavourOS offers an easier way into the Arch Linux ecosystem. Manjaro offers user-friendly Arch-based experience. Debian focuses on rock-solid stability. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed offers rolling releases with enterprise-grade testing. You're not stuck with one vision. You choose the philosophy that matches you. Windows users also aren't ready for how much Linux respects their intelligence. It doesn't hide everything behind locked doors. It doesn't assume you're incapable of understanding your system. If you want to learn, the system invites you to learn. If you don't, you can still use Linux entirely through graphical tools. The terminal is there when you need it, not forced upon you. Over time, many people discover that using Linux actually teaches them more about how computers work. Not in a painful way, but in a natural way. You become more aware of processes, services, file systems, and permissions. That knowledge carries over into other areas of computing. One of the biggest shocks for Windows users is cost. Linux itself is free. Updates are free. Most software is free, not free trial free, actually free. You don't need to worry about licenses expiring. You don't need to pay to upgrade to the next version. You don't need to buy a new OS every few years. For students, freelancers, small businesses, and hobbyists, this matters a lot. You can build a powerful workstation using Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora Workstation, or Pop_OS without spending a cent on the operating system. There's also a strong community aspect. Linux communities are everywhere. Forums, subreddits, Discord servers, matrix rooms, YouTube channels, blogs. If you run into a problem, chances are someone else already solved it. Solutions are usually documented. You're not stuck waiting for a corporate support ticket. Windows users are used to being passive consumers of their operating system. Linux turns you into a participant, even if only slightly. And once you taste that level of ownership, it's hard to go back. Another misconception is that Linux can't run real, professional software. This used to be more true than it is today. Many professional tools now have native Linux versions. Blender, DaVinci Resolve, Bitwig Studio, Unity, Unreal Engine, and countless development tools run natively on Linux. Adobe software still doesn't officially support Linux, but many creators successfully use alternatives like Krita, GIMP, Inkscape, and Kenlev. For web developers, system administrators, data scientists, and programmers, Linux is often the preferred platform. The tools are first class, the environment is flexible. The workflow is efficient. Windows users also aren't ready for how quiet Linux is. No constant nagging, no ads in the start menu. No try this feature pop-ups. No forced Microsoft account prompts on every corner. You install Linux Mint or Ubuntu, and the system mostly leaves you alone. You use your computer for what you want to do, not what the OS vendor wants you to do. Once you experience that silence, it's hard to unnotice how noisy Windows really is. And perhaps the biggest thing Windows users aren't ready for is this. Linux feels like it's moving forward in a way that respects users, while Windows increasingly feels like it's moving toward being a service, a platform for ads, subscriptions, and data collection. Linux isn't perfect. It still has rough edges. Hardware compatibility can occasionally be tricky. Some proprietary software is missing. Learning takes time. But modern Linux is miles ahead of where it used to be. If you're a Windows user who hasn't looked at Linux in years, you're not prepared for how good it has become. You're not prepared for how fast it feels. You're not prepared for how much control you'll have. You're not prepared for how freeing it feels to use an operating system that works for you instead of against you. Install Linux Mint. Try Ubuntu. Test Fedora Workstation. Boot into pop_os. Spend a week with it. Not an hour. Not a quick glance. Actually use it. Because once you see what Linux can do now, Windows may never feel the same again.